You're listening to the 95 Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 95 Podcast. I'm Dale Sellers, Executive Director at 95 Network, and I am so glad that you joined today. We're going to continue to kind of focus on pastoral health and ministry health and helping folks just kind of get their balance and their footing back after the last couple of years. I was recently at a event in Colorado Springs with some folks, and they kept referring to the pandemic as post-pandemic, and I just kind of said, wait a minute, I don't know that this is over yet, so I don't know we can call it post-pandemic. I certainly don't believe we can call the effects of it post-pandemic. And so today I have a wonderful friend that I knew. We had to reconnect, but Mark Waltz is with me today. He's a wonderful friend that I've actually met. I think, didn't we say, Mark, we met at our Strat-Up training a long time ago? Like
a long time ago. Yeah, back 2015, 16, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, a while back.
How about the fall of 2014? How about that?
I think that's probably more accurate. Yeah, I think you're right.
We were there together. Our mutual friend, Mark Meyer from the Unstuck group, was there and kind of connected us. And then we, obviously you've been out changing the world. We've been out changing the world. And so we reconnected. And today we want to have just a conversation along the lines of just encouraging our leaders who listen to the podcast, just in the realm of their own personal health. And we've done a lot of conversations around this. I'm going to keep doing it until we finally see that pastors and leaders are getting healthy. And so that's kind of where we're going to go today. This is going to be a really good conversation. You've got some cool things happening. But before we do that, let's take a quick break, and then we'll be right back.
Awesome.
95 Network is also doing some things specifically in the realm of soul care and health. We've launched a couple of different surveys that are on the front of our website. The one's called Soul Care Essentials. And so if, we begin to discover that, we do strategic planning and help churches with figuring out where they're going and who they're trying to reach. And so we have a healthy church assessment survey we do, but we've just created the Soul Care Essentials for you to work through. So if you're listening right now and you have not taken the moment to go through that, go to 95network.org. And then you'll see the surveys. They'll pop up on the homepage because what we've discovered is it doesn't do any good to sit and talk to you about getting your mission and vision and your strategic plan together if you're ready just to quit. And so we've added that piece. We haven't stopped doing what we've always done at 95 Network, but we felt like we needed to add a soul care piece. So go to 95network.org and right there on the homepage, click on the little tab there that says Soul Care Essentials, and it'll walk you through some things we have to offer, a wonderful process you can work through. There's several areas to help you. And honestly, it's really outside of ministry to help you get healthy. And then there's some follow-up emails and things that we've created for you. So go to 95network.org and do that. So Mark, before we kind of dive into some things you and I have talked about, let's take a few moments and let's get to know you a little bit. Tell us your story, how you got to where you are today. So, who is Mark?
Yeah. Wow. How long is the podcast?
We got 5 hours. I'm just kidding.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. So yeah, I grew up in church. In fact, I'm told I was in church from like 2 weeks on. Of course, I have no memory of that, but grew up in church. And in those days, it was church every Sunday morning, every Sunday evening, Wednesday night, and revivals, twice at least a year.
Right there with you, man.
Yep. So
actually, you know what? I got saved at a revival.
Did you?
Yeah, at a spring revival when I was 7 years old. That's when I asked Jesus to come in my life on a Tuesday night. So yeah,
how about that?
Yep.
Yeah. So from a large family, I'm one of seven. My dad began pastoring when I was in middle school. He'd been a cost accountant before that, and so my whole world was immersed in all things church world. By the time I was 16, I had a sense that I would be a pastor. In my context of small evangelical church, I had a narrow perspective of what that meant, what it should look like. So did student ministry while I was in college. In fact, in high school, I was in a small enough church that I led our student ministry as a high school student. So to make this long story a little shorter, I left the denomination I was part of, and I began this kind of circular revolving door on marketplace and church ministry. And so I spent some time in employment and training world, helping people find work and go back to school. I spent some time in retail management. And in between those, I was in a couple of 3 youth ministry roles. And through all of those, I found this consistent thread, even though I wasn't in a ministry role every time, found this thread of investing in people, caring about people. My whole world was always about investing in someone else. I was married at 19 while I was in one of those early student ministry roles in college. We celebrated 40 years this past November. So
we celebrated 40 last Sunday.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Happy anniversary.
I was 20 and she was 19. Happy anniversary to you.
Thank you. Yeah. We look back now and go, what people ask me, so how do you do this long? I'm like, by the grace of God and a forgiving person I'm married to. That's all there is.
People always told us the next year's the hardest. Whatever the next year was. And it's not true. It's what you make of it. Absolutely what you make of it. If you put the effort into it, you get out of what you put into it. So I'm very happy. Got great family, great wife, great life, so anyway.
Yep. Same for us for sure. So all that journey took us eventually to the West Coast, where I was a student pastor in Tacoma, Washington. And while there, some really tough news came that one of my sisters began to finally talk about some sexual abuse in her life with my father. That unraveled a whole mess of it. It didn't unravel it. It revealed it and exposed it. And the abuse was immersive throughout my family. All that to say, I ended up in a psych ward of a Seattle hospital for about 11 days.
Wow.
And much of that was not about the abuse I suffered, but it was about the shame, of course, that came from that.
So you suffered too?
I did.
Had you forgotten it? Had you put it in the back of your mind?
I'd forgotten it.
When she revealed it, it triggered you.
It triggered me.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. Forgive me. I'm trying not to take a real long time, and so I don't mean to skip anything critical.
We got 50 minutes, so you take your time.
Well, thanks for asking about that.
Well, I did because it's important, and again, those things we bury will bury us if we don't deal with them.
They do. And in that process of being hospitalized because I was suicidal, because I was depressed, and the months of counseling that followed, I had to deal with the fact that I faced depressiveness all through my life. I remember it at a very early age, ultimately, and the shame that I carried was unfortunately wrapped up for me in because we're a whole being. We don't get to keep things compartmentalized as we'd like to.
We try to.
We do try. And so everything from all the impact of the abuse, along with this, which was part of the abuse, probably, but the demand, the expectation on myself to be perfect, and to do so inside of a church environment where being perfect, getting it right was condoned and praised.
Yes.
And attaboy, the very culture that should have been one of grace and meet you and accept you where you are, served to help me cover everything for years and years and years. No one tried to do that. That was no one's intent.
It was just the flow. It's just the way.
It was the flow.
We're about the same age. It's just the way It's just the way it was. We didn't
Wow.
talk about these issues. We didn't talk about sexual abuse. We didn't talk about mental issues. And the only difference between now and then, it was going on then. We just didn't talk about it.
Absolutely.
The good news
Right.
is today we can do podcasts about these kind of things, and we can talk about this stuff because, one, grace covers us, but we also want to use, this is how Jesus takes the things that's happened to us and turns it for good because it helps others. And so, this is a great conversation to have, and one that I love to dive into, not because of what happened, because
Right.
I know that we have listeners that are going to listen today, and this may give them the courage to go get help. So I appreciate you being honest,
Yeah, you bet. So that began to be the first time in my life, even though I was raised in the church from 2 weeks old. It was the first time I really began to understand grace.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time I began to understand what community actually meant. One of the most critical assignments I had leaving the hospital was to go back home and find 3 people, including my wife. So it was 4 for me. I chose 3 friends and my wife.
Mm-hmm.
My assignment was to sit down with each of them individually and unpack my entire story. Just talk about who I was. And that wasn't an attempt to get me to talk about the abuse necessarily. It was to talk about all that I'd been carrying and revealing this imposter that I had been living with and working hard to project to everybody, but to just tell the truth about who I was.
You could have wrote a book called Stalled. Because I mean, I didn't suffer sexual abuse, but I discovered, and honestly, after what happened last year with the near drowning experience with my sabbatical, I've been, for the last year now, God's been revealing layer upon layer of how that I took it upon myself as a 6-year-old to protect my family because I saw my mom and dad get in a fight, and so I didn't suffer the same, but I did suffer emotional abuse, and I've never uttered those words till the last year. Didn't realize it. So I think us unpacking that stuff and being transparent, again, as I said earlier, I think this can be very helpful. So keep on going, bro.
Yeah. So I mean, this is unpacking, motivations for doing things. There's plenty of things we do right, for the wrong reasons, right? With each person I sat with, starting with my wife, and then these other 3 friends, after 2 hours, 2.5 hours of me just gushing, each of them leaned across to me or stood and pulled me up, embraced me, and said, "There's nothing you've ever done, nothing you'll ever do that'll make me love you less, make me love you more. I love you right where you are, how you are."
That's so good.
And I'd heard similar phrases before, but when you hear those words and you're not revealing everything you are, then light can't get to that dark place. Grace can't get to a place that grace covers it all. But I didn't get to experience grace in its fullness until I was able to look in the eyes of another human being and know that they knew everything about me and still accepted me.
I had a similar experience when Gina and I were dating, right, really at the beginning of our dating experience. So I would probably be about 19 when I did this, where, I mean, as soon as when I met her, I heard bells go off. So I knew, hey, this is the one. And so we dated for a few weeks, and she was a virgin, and I wasn't. And I didn't know if that would be a deal breaker. So I sat down with her one day. I said, "I've got to talk to you about something." And I've never shared this on the podcast, but I said, "I need to talk to you about something." I said, "I'm not a virgin. Just I'm not." And I went through some stuff and shared the details and that kind of thing about things. And I'll never, and just in line with what you just said, Mark, and you're the first person I've ever shared with that brought this back up. It was Jesus wrapping his arms around me when she looked at me and said, "I'm really sorry that you experienced those things. But I forgive you. It's in the past. Who you are today is not who you were then." And dude, it was like a 1,000-pound weight came off, because I was thinking she's going to, "Well, I'm not going to marry you. You're damaged goods." We're all damaged goods.
Yeah. Yeah, we are. We
We're
sure
all,
are.
and when you get experience grace from a human being,
Yeah.
it even makes the grace of God become more real, if that makes sense. That may be a
Yeah.
bad way of
Yeah. Oh,
saying
it
it.
does. Absolutely. Yeah. The experience of Christ in you, Christ in me, shared
Mhm.
mutually, with all the blinders and
Mhm. It's really good stuff.
masks taken off. Yeah. Yeah. It's life changing. Now, that doesn't mean that life became perfect for me.
No.
I still, so I finally came to a point where I realized that I'm not going to get to a point in my counseling
Mhm.
where all this is resolved. I began to understand that walking through emotional pain, dealing with my motivations that are driven by hurt and pain from the past,
Mhm.
that was a process of spiritual maturity. I began to finally understand what Peter Scazzaro wrote about years later, now years ago, that spirituality, emotional health, we've again tried to categorize and separate those two things and live into this spiritual maturity
Mhm.
while our whole emotional world is a wreck and
Turmoil.
broken and a mess, and
Yeah.
which means we totally misunderstand what spirituality even means
Mhm.
if we're willing to disconnect and dissect our spiritual reality from our emotional
Absolutely.
mental health. um, I'll never forget the day, um, sitting at my desk back at the church office. um, I hung up the phone from talking to one of the students' dads in my youth ministry.
Mhm.
And when I hung up the phone, I realized he was calling me about his son and he was in a troubled place. And I hung up the phone realizing that I did not engage him feeling a need to know anything
Mhm.
that I didn't know,
Mhm.
to be anything that I wasn't,
Mhm.
to try to project myself. I hung the phone realizing I just listened and cared about this dad and his son, and that was it. And I felt such peace and a sense of this is, I've done that phone call many times prior, but finally was aware of all the undercurrent happening inside of me,
Mhm.
that I've got to have the right thing to say and I got to be in the right place and I've got to, and that was released in that phone call. Now I've been on a journey, like I said,
Yeah.
since then,
Yeah.
um, in and out of trying to
Makes sense of it all.
yeah, 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 yeah.
I want to ask you this question too. If you don't want to go here, it's fine. But when you said your sister experienced her abuse from your father,
Yeah,
is that the
yeah,
same source you had it from?
yeah.
Yeah. So
Along with a grandparent and a cousin.
is he still alive?
He is not. He died about 6 years ago.
Did you have any resolve?
Very difficult resolve.
Because he's not going to
Um,
admit anything. Yeah.
right. It was a very difficult process.
Mhm.
There were things he would admit and then stop.
Yeah. It's
Um,
too painful for him to
very, very
admit it. Yeah.
painful.
And
Very,
the
very
reason
painful.
I brought that up because like my dad's still alive. He's 84, and I love him. I honor him. I respect the fact that he's my father. But as I've gotten older and worked through this stuff, it's kind of like, okay, I'm not going to get bitter and I have to. I guess I just have to settle with the fact that he probably did the best he could do. But I really don't believe that. He could have done more to be more engaged with us. And so, like, see, so
Yeah.
now every time I watch any kind of a movie or read a story where the wounds of a father are so deep, especially in a son. I'm not downplaying what it does to the females, but I'll tell you what, man. Last night, literally, Gina and I were watching the movie about it's called Saving Mr. Banks, and the whole story is about how Mary, the P.L. Travers finally let Disney do the story of about Mary Poppins, but she wouldn't let him have it for 20 years because she had to protect her dad because her dad actually was not that sharp. And I just look at that and I go, how many of us spend so much energy and then get to this place in our life after spending all that energy, we don't even recognize what we're doing. trying to either make something right or make up for it. And at some point you have to forgive and move on. Did you experience that as well?
I did. And I found that I had to forgive multiple times.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Every time I felt overwhelmed again by the hurt.
Yep.
And my first reaction was to go to a place of anger and resentment. I would have to go through a process of forgiveness again. And I learned that, forgiveness isn't this blanket we throw over somebody or something for a lifetime. An honest journey means you deal with it as you need to deal with it.
Yep.
And which is what's so critical about wellness and mental health and emotional health, spiritual health. Not everyone needs to have experienced what you or I experienced, although we've all experienced something. But none of us need to experience that exactly in order to face the dire need we have to really dive into our own need for wellness and health, probably at a level that most of us,
Don't even know.
many of us, haven't even understood a need to go to.
So here's the thing I want all of our listeners to understand. The impact of what you experience in a physical and the sexual abuse realm, it paralyzed you the same way that what I experienced was just emotional. I guess here's when I realized something was wrong. When I was writing Stalled, there's a line in the book, and my youngest sister called this out. And I said, I don't remember what I was talking about at this moment, but I was writing. I said, I don't remember a time in my life that my daddy ever rescued me. Now, I don't remember him not rescuing me. It's just blank. Yeah. And that was a beginning to open this door where I understand it. My father, he provided for our family. He did not leave us. He did not physically abuse us, but emotionally, he was never there. And so it's created the same type of adult problems, if I can word it like that you're experiencing. And so I want everybody, we had a John Sanders on a few weeks ago, and he said, it's very important that we don't compare our trauma with somebody else's trauma.
Right.
It's all trauma. And as I'm working through this stuff, and you might understand. So again, my father he just didn't communicate. And so I used to go to work with him. He built houses. I grew up building houses. But I remember, and when I tell you this, Mark, I see this in my mind. I remember riding to work with him. He had a 1969 blue step-side Chevy pickup. And I used to ride to work with him. And it had a radio, but he never cut on. We would ride to work, and he would not speak the whole time. And I used to think, why won't he talk to me? Why does he not want to talk to me?
Yeah.
And I shared that many years later when I was pastoring my church, and one of our guys came forward and with tears in his eyes and go, "You're the first person I've ever heard communicate that. My dad did the same thing." It's just like when we were together, he never spoke to me. Well, obviously I'm Mr. Words, I like to communicate. Got that from Mama. And so I remember that. I just remember thinking, what's wrong with me that he doesn't want to talk to me? Well, as I grew up and became a man and began to build, because I got my builder's license when I was 18, I recognized what he was doing. He was thinking through what he's going to do with the job that day. But instead of verbalizing it and talking through with me, he just kept it to himself. And so I just began, and all this affected my relationship with the Lord, because people talk about, Papa God and Abba Father. And again, I know I'm not being disrespectful there.
Right.
I don't know what that means.
Right.
But when I hear pastors, "Oh, you just need to crawl up in the Father's lap," I'm going, ooh. I mean, I don't even understand that. And I maybe people who hear me say that, because I've said that before, say, "Dale, you need to still get help," and I probably do need to go get help. But I'm processing it because I want to help others. Pastors, one of the things we've taught at 95 Network forever is this: if you're unhealthy, you're gonna have an unhealthy church.
Yeah,
and so you got to deal with this stuff. And so, but forgiveness. This is one of the most important lessons I learned. Forgiveness is not for the person that needs to be forgiven. Forgiveness is for you to come out of the prison that you're in.
Yeah.
So there's somebody listening right now. You're holding unforgiveness. You're going, but you don't know what they've done to me. Well, we've got two different angles here of how it affects you. At some point, you got to come out of that prison and you got to let them go. And here's why we hold on to it. We hold on to it because we want them to pay the price.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they need to be punished. Listen, they're going to stand before God just like you are.
Right.
So if you're listening today and you're like, man, I can't forgive. Yeah, you can, because you have the example where Jesus is on the cross and he's telling the people who just Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And he even said, I think it was in the Sermon on the Mount, if we don't forgive, can't be forgiven. So you worked through forgiveness as kind of layers, is what I hear you saying.
It did. Yeah, sure did. And though I haven't faced that for years now, I don't know that I won't again.
It comes up sometimes.
Yeah, it comes up. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to derail this too far, but I think sometimes forgiveness can almost look and feel punitive, as though to tell someone face to face, I forgive you can be motivated by desire to stick it to you.
Stick it to them.
And it's like, well, that's not
forgiveness.
We aren't there yet.
No.
Maybe you need to write that in a letter. Maybe you need to get that out, but let's not call it forgiveness. In fact, I struggle with the notion that one should ask someone else to forgive them. I need you to forgive me. It's like,
really?
Do I, or do I want you to hear that I really am remorseful? Whether you forgive me or not, that's a piece that's inside of you that you have to deal with for your own health and movement forward. What I'm saying is I want harmony with you. I want us to have a repaired relationship. That's a different conversation, which allows for healthy, ongoing development of what it means to heal a relationship. So
I want to say this too: if you are struggling with forgiveness, the Bible's very clear. We must forgive, and part of I think the reason for that is because it frees us. But you don't have to trust. Trust is earned. Right. Forgiveness is required of a believer, and we've got to do that. We just got to let Jesus take care of it all. But I don't want people misunderstand this, because I think this keeps people in an abuse cycle when they think, well, forgiveness means I just have to trust that person again. No, there's some mean, evil people out there. And I could share stories with you of just some very mean people who will take advantage of you any way they can. And so trust is earned. And sometimes, you have to get out of that abusive situation or whatever to move forward. But what we're talking about today is not specifically the person who did it. It's what it's done to you. And are you walking in freedom from that?
Right.
Yeah. Let's do this. We're going to take a short break. And then when we do, we're going to come back and dive into you've got some solutions that you're offering that we want to help with. So we're going to take the break right quick, and then we'll be right back.
Very good.
Well, welcome back. We've been talking today with Mark Waltz, and this has been so transparent and honest. I hope it's been very helpful for you today. If you're listening right now and you're like, man, I don't feel like I'm healthy as a leader, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, please go to our homepage at 95network.org and take the Soul Care Essential Survey. There's so much we've created there to help you, to encourage you, because as we said just a few minutes ago, if you're a healthy leader, you'll create a healthy organization. But if you're an unhealthy leader, you'll create an unhealthy organization. So Mark, when we first connected about doing just talking, and then I said, hey, let's do this on the podcast, you were telling me about some things that you're doing now to help in this arena. Kind of dive into that for us.
Yeah. So a little bridge here. I think the challenge that we have as leaders is this sense of responsibility we carry that causes us to feel like there's never enough time. I can't pause, can't stop, can't rest. It's on me. I've got to go, got to lead, got to do it, got to get it done. And that prevents us from hearing Jesus say, hey, you're weary, you're worn out, you're burned out on religion, so come to me.
I did this for you, Jesus, but I did this for you.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And, in Matthew's gospel, those statements are actually questions.
Yes.
Where we hear Jesus asking, are you tired? Are you worn out?
Mm-hmm.
Are you burned out on religion? I'm using Eugene Peterson's translation.
It's my favorite.
Yeah. But I made it a sentence because I think Jesus' questions are rhetorical.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jesus is saying, you are weary, you are tired, you are burned out, you are exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
Come to me and learn from me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even before we talk about dealing with trauma, this notion that I would practice soul care, that I would actually look at my own life and acknowledge that I can only be helpful to anyone else around me if I'm doing so from a healthy place.
Go there, buddy.
There are no two ways about that.
Absolutely.
It has to be. And unfortunately, we're really proficient at self-denial, or denying what's true about ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Especially
and
pastors.
so what's that?
Especially pastors.
Especially pastors. Yeah. And I, everything as a pastor, everything I read, everything I see, everything I think about, everything I study becomes something that I can give someone else, something I can pass on to someone else.
Just so good.
And the risk is that we end up not internalizing much of what we're reading, studying, praying through, thinking through, planning through. It's all for somebody else, for somebody else, for somebody else. And we miss this relational dynamic that we're teaching and telling everyone else about. That we have.
If you think about it, we know that Jesus modeled getting away, going off to the mountain to pray, spending the night in prayer. That was soul care. It's a different terminology now, but he modeled that for us. And one of the things, I know, I don't know how far back it goes, but it seems to me like within the last 40 years, have we heard about pastors going on sabbaticals and taking sabbaticals? And that's great. I think that's wonderful. But I'm really more concerned that you Sabbath. As a leader, I'm really concerned more that you take that day during the week than having that block of time that you build up toward, because we preach about sabbatical. We teach about, Sabbath. We preach about it. We teach about it, but we don't model it. As leaders.
We don't model it.
We don't model it because of exactly what you're saying. Everything we do in this life, somehow religion has taught us to, I actually heard pastors say this, well, I'm just wearing myself out for Jesus. And he's like, well, I don't think I called you to do that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to be sure that our listeners hear that there is good intention, caring intention on the part of pastors and church leaders that really do care for people, really do care about their souls, really do.
They carry the weight of it. It's like,
tremendous weight of it.
There is not a job, other than maybe a surgeon or someone in the medical field that works with people. There's not a job much more heavier than carrying eternal souls.
No, there's not. The Danielson Institute in Boston in 2019, before COVID, observed that pastors were among the top professions who were at risk for PTSD. Up there with medical professionals, police officers, firefighters. That doesn't mean every pastor suffered or experienced PTSD. It means the kind of work that pastors do sets them up to be candidates for. And many of the symptoms of PTSD, if we look at our lives carefully, many are carrying a number of those symptoms.
Think about this a minute, Mark. So we know, I had my friend John Sanders on a few weeks ago, and he talked about PTSD specifically in the first responder arena. But, a pastor often is right behind the first responder.
Absolutely.
And sometimes they see the same things. And then, but then a pastor also deals with a situation where there's a divorce happening, or maybe abuse, as we've talked about earlier, being discovered. And we internalize that stuff.
Yeah, we sure do.
So we've got to find ways to deal with it.
Right. The turns that pastors make in a single day, the kinds of tasks and activities and engagements they're involved in, it's neck breaking. The pace at which things turn and move, and you could be on to something else in the next moment. Totally disconnected what you were doing an hour ago. It is high stress on.
So what are we going to do about this, Mark?
Yeah.
How are we going to help them?
I want to
You got
be
some
helpful.
ideas?
I want to be helpful.
Yeah.
So I started back in January, inviting just a few, 10 to 12 people at a time, church leaders, pastors, to a 6-month cohort. And this 6-month cohort is designed to allow me to facilitate, not dictate, facilitate a process, a journey that invites participants to learn some new information about how they're wired, about their own personality, about how they show up in the world, to explore contemplative prayer practices, to examine and practice other activities, engagements of rest and renewal and soul care. We read a book together focused on that. We'll discuss that book throughout the 6 months. We get to know each other through that journey. And much of this comes out of what I was talking about earlier in my own story, that I needed people in my life to help me journey toward healing. It is not a solo adventure.
If you could do it alone, you would have done it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And years then separated from my initial hospitalization and recovery work, I found myself in an executive pastor's role at a large church, where I've been a connections pastor for 14 years. In that whole thing, in spite of everything I'd learned, my wife nicknamed my laptop my mistress.
She's calling you out.
Because there were too many nights
Yes.
that while she was falling asleep, I was sitting on the other side of the bed, responding to emails, working on projects till midnight,
So
1, 2 in the morning.
That's so unhealthy.
So unhealthy.
Yep.
So I say that to say I've still needed help, right? And it was there were people in my life who helped me see where I needed to shift, change, put boundaries in place, actually learn to practice again, apparently, this Sabbath. And so in this journey of 6 months, we're online 10 times in a session together. So there's frequent contact. Here's what I hope for at the end of the 6 months. One thing I hope for is that people walk away with a fresh awareness of just where they are and what they need. Everyone coming into this comes into it from a different place.
Sure.
I have people in a cohort right now. I'm in the 3rd cohort, and I have people in right now who are in between ministries. They've had to step away, completely burned out. They're doing something very, very different from what they've been doing. They think they might go back at some point, but they're not sure yet. I have others who are in the thick of it, and realize they have no margin in their lives. So everyone's coming into this from a different place. What they need, I'm hoping, trusting that God uses the resources we're using, the conversation that we're in, to help them drill down into what they need to do. I will tell you this: the books that we're reading are a bit of a dive, because here's what I've learned about myself, and it's been validated in others I'm working with this past year. The reason we often don't build these rhythms and practices of Sabbath and renewal into our lives is because there's inner work that hasn't been done, that's been ignored, that needs to be dealt with. And whether it is trauma, whether it is this voice, and we all hear a voice, it doesn't always say the same thing, but we all have this nagging voice that makes itself heard. You're not enough. You don't deserve this. Everyone else is better than you are. You can't keep doing this. You should quit. All of us hear these voices, and those voices are pointing to something troubled or troubling inside of us. And we've got to hit the pause button. I think too often when we talk about taking a day off, pastors, especially here, I should disengage from my church work, which means the day off, the Sabbath, becomes a day to catch up on everything else they weren't able to get done the other 6 days.
Yep.
And so the whole day is spent running errands, doing tasks, doing chores. It's a different kind of work. Maybe it's true for some that the kind of work they engage on a day off is actually renewing, refreshing for them. But I think often it's simply doing something different than they've done the other 6 days that feels like a bit of a break. That still isn't Sabbath. The expectation, go ahead.
One of the things that we discovered, we did a podcast with some of our team the week after Easter, talking about how to deal with the letdown, if you will, of Easter being over, because there's a big push to it. And Bobby, one of our team members, made this statement, and actually I'm writing a book now, and I'm adding a chapter about this particular topic. He said the problem with most pastors is we never get to complete anything. You know, when you're working with people, nothing's ever completed.
Right.
And he said, so what he does on his Sabbath is he does little projects. Like he grew up building like I did. So he'll do like a little work project where he can start it at the beginning of the day and finish it, whether it's building a birdhouse or doing a puzzle. And that may sound simple, but he just talked about the fact that as pastors and as spiritual leaders, and it doesn't matter if you're a lead pastor, what capacity, if you're in ministry, the work's never done till someone dies, which that is traumatic, and they go on to glory. And so we've got to build in our Sabbath system, whether it's play around the golf. Some of our guys don't want to do that because they, or whether to go hunting or whatever it is. And I don't want to limit it just to the wild at heart guys, because there's a lot of guys that do other things, that are not, in that arena, but what you got to find something you can complete.
Yeah. I think it's really valid. And I don't want to discount any activity that's renewing to somebody.
Sure. Absolutely.
So long as it's renewing.
Yes.
If at the end of that activity, whatever it is, if one doesn't feel more refreshed and renewed than when they started doing it, then find something else to do.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't it. The same thing I would add, and I think this is really tough about Sabbath, is how is it you're creating space to be quiet long enough to listen to what's going on inside of you, to what the Spirit of God wants to say from within you. And that's a piece that we struggle very much to do. And so please listeners, don't hear me say, you got to find a 24-hour period to be silent.
Yeah.
I think there's value to that. Maybe it's once a month, maybe it's once a quarter.
Yeah.
If you've never done it, at least once a year, but somewhere you got to spend a longer period of time in silence. But start small, start simple. Go ahead.
I got to confess here. You're my counselor right now. So I need you to know this. I struggle as a 60-year-old man reading books because I learned as a teenager that that's not important.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is to sit down and even when I was writing my book, to sit down and read a book is not doing quote unquote real work. And so I still struggle with it. I have to fight that battle going, well, you need to be doing something productive.
Yep.
So to be stop and be quiet, it's like, okay, there's 30 seconds to that. Okay, look, what's next? And so this is the way I'm wired. I have a feeling some other people are wired. And so I want to recommend a book here. John Mark Comer's book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. It really helped me there. So anyway, I just wanted to drop that.
It's really good
because I'm still I'm a mess.
Yeah. No, I'm too. Here's the thing. I'm not facilitating these cohorts because I've figured it out.
You're going through therapy.
I'm journeying with everyone who journeys alongside me. I am in this. I could ask my wife to pull up a chair here and she could tell you
Yeah.
how much I'm still needing to work on all of this. John Mark Comer's book is a great recommendation. I do recommend it as well.
Yeah.
Another is Wayne Muller's book written back in the 90s called Sabbath. And Muller, what I love about his book is that you can read the entire book through and gain so much, or you can pick it up and look at chapter 12 and it stands alone.
Sure.
At the end of every chapter in Muller's book, he cites some examples, some activities that you can engage as mini Sabbaths. While he doesn't dismiss the value of a 24-hour Sabbath, he writes the book acknowledging that most of us have to have a starting point, some incremental growth toward that. And so the activities he recommends are often little moments that any of us can pick up and begin to practice what it means to pull aside, actually be quiet. Yeah, it's a tough thing. I think it's easy to excuse and go, well, yeah, but I'm an A-type, I'm driven, I'm never gonna like calm down, sit down. The reality is, I think some introverts, it may be harder for some introverts to do this than extroverts, because introverts feel like they're quiet all the time, but it's not always productive quiet. So
it's just so good. This is just so good.
So they're great ancient practices too, that have been demonstrated for a long, long time. Lectio Divina is a great practice to engage Scripture in a way that doesn't have me studying through for a message. Sure. So I'm not trying to go through all these spiritual practices, but
well, here's what we need to do. So
go ahead.
We could go for hours in this conversation, but what I want to do is pastor or leader, if you're listening right now, and this is hitting you where you are, and you have not, it's come up before, but you've not dealt with it. You need a coach. That's just a simple truth. You need someone to coach you. And so Mark has something in play right now to help you. You join one of these cohorts. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in the show notes these books we've recommended, how to get in touch with Mark, about all the information about the cohort. It'll all be here. But in case someone just can't stop right now to look that up, how do they contact you?
You can reach out to me at marklwaltz.com. That's my website. Lots of ways to connect with me there. You can email me at mark@marklwaltz.com. Find me on socials and all of those. I will respond. Yeah. I will respond within 24, 48 hours. I'll respond to you. Yeah.
Well, I hope everyone listening understands we care about you. We care about you. And it's kind of like one of the things I discovered as I was writing stalled. I hit a writer's block, which is really odd for a guy who wrote his first book. But it was like, okay, I'm like, okay, God, I'm missing the higher purpose here. And then it hit me. It's not about just getting you healthy for today, so you can have a healthy church today. It's about handing off healthy churches to the next generation. And what you don't, what you tolerate, you will perpetuate. It'll just keep going. And so if you keep tolerating this, I know I need to do this. In fact, Mark, I'm about to write a new article, and the title of the article is this: I know, but. Because I hear that all the time. Yeah, I know, Pastor Dale, or I know Dale, but and I'm like, could we just stop with the excuses? So we're going to tell folks how to get in touch with you. Hopefully there'll be some connection points here. I am going to add this podcast to our soul care piece, because I think it's very important to do that. So when we wrap up the podcast, we always have to ask this one question. I want you to just go anywhere you want to go with this. So you've got hundreds of small and mid-sized church leaders listening right now, all over the country, maybe around the world. What's one word of advice or wisdom or some kind of nugget of instruction or encouragement you could give them today if you were sitting with them with a cup of coffee?
Well, I would say, can I say two things? So I'll be brief.
Take your time.
One, I would say, look in the mirror and recognize that you'll never, ever look in the eyes of another person, including the eyes in the mirror, without seeing an image bearer of God. You bear God's image. Look in the mirror every day and know that reflection back at you is the image of God. Your life matters. You have worth. You have value. Deep down, whatever it is you do to perform, to lead, to help, to serve, none of that work makes you better than you are, because you can't be better than you are in God's eyes. So, second thing I would say is, let's make our local churches the premier place in the community that people think of when they think about what it means to be well and healthy. People now more than ever, it's the front page, it's all the conversation is around wellness, well-being, holistic, wholehearted. Our places of worship, our communities of faith ought to be the pinnacle, not perfect, but people ought to walk into our spaces, into our communities, and have a sense right away that these people are talking about an abundant life, actually know something about abundance, actually know something about, not because they're denying anything, not because they're putting anything in the closet, not because we're saying that just hope and believe and everything's going to be fine, but because these people actually are doing the hard work of what it looks like to be well and healthy, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically. We ought to be that. We're the people who want everyone to understand what it means to follow a Jesus who says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. That very greatest command holds in it this integration of a whole person, mind, body, soul, and strength. If I'm going to love God with everything in me, it's on me to allow God to heal everything in me, to complete everything in me, so I can love God the way I want to love God. And if I'm doing that well, then I'll probably be able to do a little bit better at loving my neighbor like I love myself, as the Imago Dei. And none of that's gonna come except that I give my soul the attention I'm asking everyone I'm leading to give attention to their own. I've got to practice and lead that. Yeah.
That's so good. Before I let you go, I want to say this. If you have a couple of success stories of folks who would be willing to talk, I would love to have you back on the podcast, and let's walk through how the cohort helped them. So if we can identify some folks who'd be willing to be on the podcast, I think that would be a very popular one. Thank you so much for being on today, for your transparency. And I believe Jesus is going to use this podcast to help a lot of folks.
I'm grateful as well. And thank you for your kindred spirit. I'm really thankful for this today. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.